6 months is how long Luigi Mangione was missing from around July until the shooting of Brian Thompson that happened in New York. And whether or not Luigi Mangione was the shooter or not is still up for debate. But what happened during those 6 months may be the key to Luigi Mangione's life. It may save his life in the end. Let me explain. If this case has you a little confused on the legal issues, then you're not alone. I've been covering this from day one, and I can tell you I got confused in my own video that I'm going to show you today. I'm doing this pre-cut for this video because already I made a mistake in there because it's easy to conflate the state and the federal charges. Let me do my best real quick to explain to you. This video is going to focus primarily on mitigating the second-degree murder charges against Luigi Mangione in the state of New York and trying to bring that down to a manslaughter charge using a certain type of law in New York called the extreme emotional disturbance. Fuck, I don't even remember exactly what the wording is. Anyways, it's in the video. The point being is that the EED defense we're talking about in this video primarily is about the second degree murder charges. There are also first degree murder charges in the state of New York versus Luigi Mangione. And that is going to be a separate issue. That is being fought over as well. Right now, there's back and forth between Karen Decmeber and others on the whole active terrorism part that the state has used to bring first-degree murder against Luigi Mangione. I know this is super confusing. Bear with me. So Karen Decmeber is going to try to argue that there was no active terrorism, which is what New York State used to elevate the charge to be a first-degree murder charge in furtherance of terrorism. Now, here's the confusing part, as if that wasn't confusing enough. The federal government is seeking to execute Luigi Mangione, but it's not a first-degree, second-degree murder type situation. They charge differently in the federal government. The federal government wants to execute Luigi Mangione, and all of this argument has nothing to do at the moment with anything in the federal case. This is focusing on the first and second degree murder charges in the state of New York versus Luigi Mangione, and primarily it's about the second degree murder charges and whether or not those can be mitigated down to manslaughter, which is a much lesser penalty. And it's very, very nuanced, but I think you want to pay attention because at the end of the day, this could be the difference between Luigi Mangione spending the rest of his life in prison or being executed if the federal government has their way, or walking in 5 years. Is there a scenario in which Luigi Mangione walks in 5 years? Pay attention. And as I get into this video, I'm going to try to put a little overlay where I make a mistake in the wording, maybe once, maybe twice, to try to clarify. Because again, it's easy to conflate these things. This is a super, super nuanced legal battle that is taking place on a high-stake game of chess with master attorneys. And it takes a lot for us lay people to work through it. So again, stay with it as much as you can. We're talking about the second degree murder charges and if they can be mitigated down to manslaughter, changing what could be a very, very long sentence into maybe 5 to 25 years at max for Luigi Mangione. And how would that work? Let's pay attention. Here we go. Now, in the early part of this whole thing with Luigi Mangione, when the defense came in and started to make their defense of Luigi Mangione after his arrest in Altoona, Pennsylvania for the shooting of Brian Thompson in New York City, I said that insanity defense or anything to do with mental illness was not even possible. The reason being is that typically those things are filed within the first 30 days. A statement that, hey, look, my client has got emotional issues, and they start doing psych evaluations very early in that process. The fact that Karen Decmeber, in the case of Luigi Mangione, was asking for a laptop for him to help in his own defense suggested to me that you can't simultaneously say, hey, look, my client has some kind of mental issue and be saying that he's capable of assisting in your defense. However, I didn't factor in several things. One, the fact that a late filing, even though it is typically done within 30 days, a late filing of an emotional defense does not have to happen in the first 30 days. It can happen this late. In fact, because the case, and this is what Karen Decmeber recently argued, when a deadline came up just a few days ago saying that we need a little bit more time to decide if we're going to use some kind of mental defense, diminished capacity, or crime of passion defense, which again, I didn't think was possible. But when Karen said she needed a little bit more time to evaluate it, I thought to myself, wow, is this still on the table? Is it really possible to claim some kind of momentary insanity, crime of passion, anything like that. And yes, it is still possible. And in fact, it may be the key to saving Luigi Mangione's life. And by that, I mean, right now, Luigi Mangione faces life in prison without the possibility of parole as one option, but the more serious option is death. They've made that clear from national pulpits by having the U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi come on and tell us that basically if there's ever anyone who deserves being put to death, it's Luigi Mangione for what he did. Now, at the end of the day, all he did was shoot a CEO. And again, Karen has successfully argued, in my opinion, what about the other 300 and something people murdered in New York last year? Why are they not deserving of death? Why is only Luigi Mangione deserving of death for murder when all kinds of people committed murder last year in New York? Why is this case so special that of all the people who committed murder last year, only Luigi Mangione is the only one who certainly deserves being put to death? But when I found that Karen Agnifilo was putting out a request for a little bit more time to decide whether or not they're going to go for an insanity, or I should not an insanity, but for they were going to go for a mental type of issue, I thought to myself, how is that even possible? So I did a lot more research, and this is what I found out. That missing 6 months of Luigi Mangione's life may be the key to absolutely everything. As you may know, Luigi Mangione was in Hawaii having a good time, had a surfing accident, and then kind of went off the grid. He had some back issues, and he went off the grid for about 6 months. It was somewhere around June of 2024 that Luigi Mangione seemed to have kind of vanished. In July of 2024, his mother filed a missing persons report, last known in San Francisco. Sometime later, around close to 6 months, as we're approaching the 6-month mark, Luigi Mangione shows up in New York City, supposedly. The federal government has said they tracked him to arriving in New York sometime in late November, and then stalking and shooting Brian Thompson on December 4th. I think it's 4th. Yeah. September 4th, 2024 in New York, in Manhattan, outside of an investor conference. Now, that period of time that he went missing, nobody seems to know what happened. And here's why that is the key to Luigi Mangione's life. If, for example, the defense wants to argue some kind of defense of insanity or crime of passion, the one that I think they will most likely go for is something called the extreme emotional disturbance, or EED defense. It's kind of a special New York special, if you will. New York has the EED defense, which essentially is also labeled the crime of passion. A perfect example of a crime of passion, of course, is you walk into a house and you find your spouse in bed with another person, and you snap and you kill those two people. Many times you can use an EED defense, an extreme emotional disturbance, to say, look, I snapped under the circumstances, and yes, I committed murder, but you need to know the whole story, essentially. Now, in that case, an EED defense takes second-degree murder and reduces it to manslaughter. That manslaughter charge carries a 5 to 25-year sentence. So, can Luigi Mangione argue that he had extreme emotional disturbance, something to that effect, and therefore take a second-degree murder charge and reduce it to manslaughter, and with the possible minimum of 5 years, only spend 5 years in jail for killing Brian Thompson, if he did it? Now, again, let's keep in mind, let's never, never, never forget that Luigi Mangione is considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. We haven't even proven Luigi Mangione is the shooter. But if Karen Agnifilo believes that the evidence is overwhelming against her client, that he did the shooting, and that's what, by the way, that is what the prosecution says. It is overwhelming evidence that Luigi Mangione committed the crime. They know it's him. They have proof 6 ways to Sunday. That's what they argue. If Karen Agnifilo agrees that the evidence is overwhelming, the only option she may have to save Luigi Mangione's life is to argue the EED defense, which is the extreme emotional disturbance. Now, here's where that plays in. I want to point out 2 things. Luigi Mangione is facing first-degree murder charges. And so this is another thing that recently is playing out in this case. Karen Agnifilo, her team is fighting the issue about the act of terrorism, the committing murder in the furtherance of an act of terrorism. Specifically, Karen Agnifilo has fired back at the prosecution saying, explain to me how this particular crime raises to the level of an act of terrorism. And in particular, she went after the idea that they said that he he made grave danger. How did he explain it? He put people in grave danger who weren't involved. Because he did it on a crowded New York City street. Therefore, he was putting other people's lives recklessly in danger. That's one of them. That he targeted an industry like the healthcare system. That was another one. That he may have been trying to affect government policy. That's another one. Basically, the government is trying to say that Luigi Mangione is a terrorist, and that's what makes that first-degree murder charge so critical, because the EED defense cannot mitigate a first-degree murder charge. So let's set that aside for just a moment. Well, not quite yet. So again, what's happening is Karen Agnifilo and her team are attacking the in furtherance of an act of terrorism first-degree murder charge. They're trying to say, look, this does not rise to the level of act of terrorism. Therefore, we need to take off that first-degree murder charge. If the first-degree murder charge sticks, then everything I'm about to say is a moot point. That is a separate issue that is being fought right now. Can they remove first-degree murder? If they can remove first-degree murder and they're left with multiple counts of second-degree murder, Luigi Mangione has a chance in this scenario to walk within 5 to maximum 25 years. I believe he's 27, 28 years old right now. I think he's 27. So he could walk in his 30s, or he could walk by the time he's in his early 50s and spend the rest of his life as a quote-unquote normal human being. Is that possible? Well, it all is going to rely, in my opinion, to what happened during that 6 months, and here's why. The extreme emotional defense argument, the EED, has to be demonstrated to a jury what was going on in Luigi Mangione's head prior to the shooting. Again, this is if the defense is going to argue, yeah, our guy did it, but here's why he did it. So what they have to do is they have to show a jury that Luigi Mangione's mind was starting to degrade, and that this downward spiral of his behavior led to the shooting of Brian Thompson. Now, what we don't know, and anyone in America seems to not know, is what Luigi Mangione was doing for those dark 6 months where he disappeared between June and December when the shooting happens. He just seems to have gone off the grid. Now, what we do know, for example, that things were happening. Things were happening during that time. United Healthcare was coming under investigation by the Department of Justice. They were being targeted for antitrust violations, for buying up smaller companies, for example, and making a monopoly in their space, for buying up consumer advocate type groups like Change Health, that was supposed to be kind of like a little buffer between consumers and the health insurance industry to make sure that their claims get paid. They would buy up the buffer between people and the insurance company, therefore giving them better chances of doing whatever the hell they wanted. And Brian Thompson and Andrew Whitty were recently hired. Brian Thompson was hired by United Healthcare and Andrew Whitty by United Health Group to bring in a change and make more money for their shareholders. In doing so, they decided to employ AI to increase the number of denial of claims. So they were working on denying people's claims more and more, therefore making United Healthcare more profitable and therefore making their shareholders excited. And so Brian Thompson was going to a shareholder that meeting to brag about how much money they're going to be making because they deny claims for everyone across the country. Meanwhile, groups like the People Actions Committee or the People Actions Group in Minnesota were protesting outside the headquarters in July during those missing 6 months of Luigi Mangione. If Mangione participated, for example, in those protests, or if he met people who were passionate enough to go protest against United Healthcare. And by the way, they were carrying a coffin outside of United Healthcare's office saying United denies care. And so they were carrying a coffin around outside the headquarters when Brian Thompson was there, sending a very stark message. These people were very upset, and stories were going around about people who lost loved ones because of the denials of claim. People were getting extremely incensed to hatred and violence towards United Healthcare. Luigi Mangione, even if he was the shooter, wasn't the only person who had massive anxiety over the things that United Healthcare were doing. So let me step back a second. Again, to go for the EED defense, Karen Agnifilo has to show some kind of pattern that is demonstrable in writings and whatever, that Luigi Mangione was slipping into a negative headspace. That is, and here's the key, that a juror can see that if they were Luigi Mangione, they could understand how he went down that road. Now, this is key because a jury doesn't have to say, it's not like the jury has to agree in an EED defense that a reasonable person would have done what Luigi Mangione did. This is the best part for Luigi Mangione and his defense, and those who want to see Luigi Mangione possibly live a life outside of the bars over something that even may include murder. If you feel that you want Luigi Mangione to live a normal life, that you see him as some kind of folk hero because of what he did, then you have to understand that a jury, all the jury has to be convinced of is that if they were Luigi Mangione and they were going and seeing the things that he saw, they could understand how he can get to that point. So if the defense can show that Luigi Mangione was engaging with conversations with people and hearing their emotional distress, and that was causing him extreme emotional distress, and if Luigi Mangione could be documented that he felt that nobody was doing anything to stand up against this big giant, that he himself would just have to be one brave enough to finally head it to take this on head on, and if he decided through a downward spiral of being surrounded by people who are telling him how much their lives are destroyed because of United Healthcare, if they could be documented that there was a history of him becoming more and more emotionally distressed himself over what was happening in America with United Healthcare, you could potentially successfully argue an EED. And again, all you have to do is you have to be able to convince a jury that if they were in your shoes and they saw and heard the things that you heard, they could understand how you could get to that conclusion. It doesn't mean that they have to agree they would have made the same conclusion. It doesn't mean that they believe that a reasonable person would have made the same conclusion. All they need to be able to understand is looking at Luigi Mangione's history and what we see before us, we can see how he was downward spiraling into this, and we can see how he got to the point where he felt this was the only option. If they can do that, then a jury can give Luigi Mangione a reduction, a mitigation of that second-degree murder charge and bring it down to manslaughter. And manslaughter in this case would only include a sentence between 5 and 25 years. So literally, if in the right circumstances with the right jury, Luigi Mangione could walk in 5 years for the murder of Brian Thompson if he committed the murder. Let's not forget, again, that he has a presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law. I swear I never stop talking, do I? Nonstop. Anyways, the point being is that for those of you who are believers that Luigi Mangione did something good, that he was ultimately there was some kind of form of vigilante justice or revolutionary, whatever you want, a revolutionary anarchist, as some people will call him. If that's how you view Luigi Mangione, as some kind of folk hero, then this is the thing I feel that you are most looking for. Because again, if Karen Agnifilo, and this is the part that surprises me, because I thought that the whole insanity thing was not even an option. What I didn't understand is New York City's kind of unique posture on the EED, it seems like. And this was a shocker to me. And it makes sense why Karen Agnifilo would maybe go this way. And again, here's the argument. If Karen Agnifilo, there's two ways Karen can go. And by the way, I keep doing a bunch of by the ways. By the way, this does not mean Karen Agnifilo is going for any kind of mental health issue. The statute that is being looked at, the penal law that's being looked at onto whether or not she can do a mental health defense is simply an option. It is one of many options. And if I were any attorney, I would say that you want to keep all of your options on the table. Having options is always a good thing. So it's possible Karen is just keeping that option on the table. So one of the defenses for Luigi Mangione can be, our guy didn't do it. He wasn't even there. Prove he was there. If there's things we don't know about. And again, keep in mind, the shooter was masked during the shooting. The camera angles that caught his face were at weird angles. There's a lot of people in America who believe that there's no way any reasonable human being can identify Luigi Mangione in those photos. So if the government can't prove a very, very compelling argument that Luigi Mangione arrived in New York City to kill Brian Thompson and that's him on video, then they could be in trouble. So Karen Agnifilo still could try to argue our guy didn't do it, prove that he did it, and come up with some kind of alibi. He was somewhere else during the time, whatever the case may be. We don't know that that's not on the table behind the scenes, and therefore it may be the case. But here's the thing. If Karen Agnifilo argues that our guy didn't do it and the government can convince the jury that they did, then he gets life in prison without the possibility of parole at least, and if not, possibly executed, because that will be the only options. If he did it and the jury sees that he did it, and I shouldn't say it's the only options. Let me repeat that. Let me rephrase that. A jury could still find him not guilty, even if he did the crime. This is something we talk about from time to time called jury nullification. A jury could say, yes, we believe Luigi Mangione did arrive in New York City and he did go behind Brian Thompson's back and he did shoot Brian Thompson and he ended his life. And those things all happened. That is an act of murder. You're right. He did it. And then when the judge asks, and what's your verdict, they can say not guilty. It's a shocking type of verdict that is called jury nullification. The jury does not have to explain to the judge why they came up with that decision. If they decide that the law doesn't really deal with this case appropriately, that it was somehow, as Luigi Mangione may have laid the groundwork for, this was an act of war, that Brian Thompson had essentially declared war on the United States through their policies to make their shareholders money, and therefore it was basically one soldier shooting another soldier. If that can stick with a juror, even one juror on that jury, it is possible they could come back with that kind of situation. Hung jury is more likely to be the case. A hung jury is really the one juror scenario. 1 in 12 decides, I don't care what you fucking say, this guy's a hero in my eyes because I hate the insurance industry and that guy was trying to save lives, and I sympathize with that. If you get one juror who views Luigi Mangione as somebody who was sticking up for the little people, you get a hung jury, because you need to have all 12 say, yeah, he did the murder and he deserves to be executed for it. And I don't see that happening in New York State. Remember, New York State doesn't believe in executing people in the first place. The state hasn't executed for somebody for a very long time. In general, it is believed that New York City does not believe in putting people to death anymore. The only reason it's on the table in the state of New York is because the federal government has brought charges against Luigi Mangione, and the federal government still does believe in executing people. In fact, Donald Trump has mandated that the country be hard on crime and to go after criminals and seek the death penalty when necessary or when appropriate. And Donald Trump believes, apparently, that Luigi Mangione is the poster child for a necessary execution of the death penalty, because, again, at the end of the day, in my sarcastic way, killing a CEO is one of the most heinous crimes in America. Again, it doesn't matter all the other murders that happen in this country. Those all don't give a shit. But you kill a CEO and, motherfucker, you need to pay, because that's the way our country works. Our country celebrates, especially big business, celebrates CEOs. And the last thing they want is anybody thinking that they can kill a CEO, because CEOs are special people. That's the message that we seem to be sending in this America, that the only reason Luigi Mangione is worthy of death and not the other 300 and something people that were murdered in New York last year is because he killed a CEO, and CEOs are special people. That's the message I think we don't want to send in this country, because we're already going towards a class warfare system in this country where people feel disenfranchised and feel that the elite is constantly abusing the little people, which is the reason why Luigi Mangione is being seen as a folk hero, because people are tired of the elite oppressing them and constantly making excuses. Well, Brian Thompson was just doing his job, making shareholders money. How dare somebody say that somebody should be shot for doing their job? All he was doing is a really good job for his shareholders, making him money. There are people who believe that way, and the rest of America thinks, fuck you. If your way of making money is abusing people and killing people so that you can make your shareholders money, that's not acceptable. So at the end of the day, this becomes a very difficult and challenging situation, because, again, at the devil's advocates, I am not advocating vigilante justice. I am not, by the way, when the feds, I believe, came and asked me, do you consider yourself a revolutionary anarchist? No, I do not, sir. Thank you very much. Now, at the time, I didn't realize I was probably being interviewed by the feds, but I'm now convinced I was being interviewed by the feds, who were asking me, hey, do you know what anarchy is? Do you consider yourself a revolutionary anarchist? Which is exactly what the federal government claims Luigi Mangione is doing, that he called himself a revolutionary anarchist. And therefore, I was suddenly approached by somebody trying to ask me, hey, how do you feel about Luigi Mangione? Do you consider yourself an anarchist? No, feds, I don't consider myself an anarchist, and I don't condone vigilante justice. However, at the end of the day, all a jury has to do is see Luigi Mangione's progression of his mind in the 6 months that he went dark. And if Karen Agnifilo can prove that Luigi Mangione was on a downward spiral and became depressed, despondent, decided that there was no other option to fix an out-of-control healthcare system than what he did, one might be able to convince a jury that if I were Luigi Mangione and I saw the things that he did, and that's the key, what happened during those 6 months is the key to everything. If they can convince the jury that during that 6 months, Luigi Mangione saw things that made him feel that this was the only option to save America, then a jury could argue that if I were in his shoes, I can see how he got to that point and mitigate that second-degree murder charge down to manslaughter, which could give him anywhere between 5 and 25 years, and it changes everything for the discussion. But again, ending on this thought, that requires them to also remove the first-degree murder charge. Luigi Mangione is facing first-degree murder. You cannot mitigate first-degree murder using the EED defense. So that's off the table, which is why I believe that argument is being fought separately. Again, Karen Agnifilo's team is doing everything they can to get first-degree murder and the capital punishment off the table. to say that that's not appropriate. If they can successfully argue that it's not appropriate to call Luigi Mangione a terrorist and they get the first-degree murder charge removed and they're left with only second-degree murder, then I think they would go after the ED defense and say, if you were a person in Luigi Mangione's shoes, you could see how he got to that point. And yeah, it was horrible, but maybe reduce that to manslaughter and give him 5 to 25 years. So there you go. That's my take on what's happened. And again, I eat a little crow because I originally told you I didn't think that was possible. When we were months into this and they hadn't already given notice that they were going to try for some kind of insanity or temporary insanity, I said it's not possible at this point, in my opinion, because we're well past the 30 days that it's typically done in. And that is true. 30 days is when it's typically done in. But in this case, no trial date has been set for Luigi Mangione, and therefore his attorney had argued there's no rush to get this done in 30 days after sentencing because we don't even have a trial date yet. And so she did successfully argue for more time, and now she's asking for a little bit more time. And I think at the end of the day, EED defense may be the way to go for Luigi Mangione to have a shot of not spending the rest of his life behind bars. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think Luigi Mangione is going to go for an EED defense, the extreme emotional disturbance? Do you believe that he did an act of passion, a crime of passion? Can you argue a crime of passion if it took you time to go hunt somebody down and travel state lines and go shoot him? That's going to be the monumental task they have to overcome. How can it be a crime of passion if you stalked the guy and then shot him after traveling across state lines? It could still be argued, but the question is, will they be able to successfully do it? What do you think? Luigi Mangione, does it cheapen his message to say that he had some kind of emotional crisis, or is it the answer? Is that how Luigi Mangione saves his life and doesn't spend the rest of his life behind bars or possibly get executed? Drop a comment, like, subscribe, all those great things. Have a great day.